If you are already a Christian fundamentalist, does it make sense to go ahead and become a Mormon? Well, this will get some raised eyebrows from the evangelicals, but stay tuned and I'll tell you why there is a very good logic. According to your own method of perceived evidence, why the tale of Joseph Smith makes more sense than your own Sunday school fables. Now, if you've ever happened into debate with a Christian fundamentalist and have asked them to clarify proof that Jesus Christ actually resurrected from the dead after crucifixion, they will immediately respond with the amount of witnesses that saw Christ 3 days after he died. Matter of fact, he supposedly appeared to approximately 500 people. 500 witnesses that show that the resurrection from the dead of one man named Yeshua was a fact and not a fable. So one counter-argument that I immediately strike back with is to ask the Christian fundamentalist, so you're ready to convert to the Church of the Latter-day Saints then? In which they immediately look perplexed, asking me why in the world they would choose to suddenly be a Mormon now. Well, because you just told me, Christian evangelical, how you put stock in the amount of witnesses who supposedly saw Christ after he had died. Well, what does that have to do with the Church of Latter-day Saints, they ask? Well, let's get to it. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon movement, lived from 1805 to 1844. He claims that in 1820 he saw the apparitions of two persons. One was God the Father and the other was Jesus Christ. And he would have been a mere 15 years old. 3 years later, he claimed that he was visited by the angel Moroni, who directed him to a buried book of golden plates. And the scripture that was transcribed eventually became the Book of Mormon. He published this book when he was 24 years old, and in 1838, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints became official. And the Mormons were very much persecuted, as we know. And in 1844 in Illinois, a mob stormed the jail he was being held in and shot Joseph Smith to death. And as far as the Mormons are concerned, he was martyred for the movement. And today, there's almost 17 million Mormons in the world. So the Christian fundamentalist asks, interesting story, but why would that make me convert to the Church of Latter-day Saints? Well, there were 3 witnesses who saw these golden plates that were given to Joseph Smith by the angel. Their names were Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, and David Whitmer. The plates were not only shown to them, but they were confirmed by the voice of God himself, according to the 3 witnesses and Joseph Smith. Later, 8 more witnesses issued a statement that said they were shown the plates by Smith as well. All 8 were members from the Whitmer and Smith family. So let's compare the story of the resurrection of Christ and the witnesses that supposedly saw him appear after his crucifixion and the Joseph Smith story. We don't have a single scrap of evidence from any witness who saw Christ. We have writings of that occurrence long after the fact, the earliest being 30 years after Christ died at best. You have a collection of writings from people who say there were witnesses, 500 of them altogether. You don't actually have a confirmation of any witness himself. Not Roman, Jew, Christian, Pharisee, nobody. Not a papyrus, not a paper, not an ink sketch on an animal skin, nothing. Every bit of writing you have about the witnesses to the resurrection, they were long after the fact and we have no idea who wrote these writings. It is a well-established fact that we don't know who wrote the Gospels. There is no authorship, there is no signature. There is not one person who signed, "I knew Christ, I was his friend, I saw him crucified, I saw him rise from the dead, signed, friend of Christ." But Joseph Smith has a set of 3 witnesses and a set of 8 witnesses. We know their names, we know who they were, we can confirm that they actually lived, they were real people, and statements were issued of this fact of these witnesses. But look how many people became Christians after the fact of Christ's resurrection, the Christian will argue. Well, look how many converted to the Church of the Latter-day Saints. There are almost 17 million of them today. But people were martyred in the name of Christ, the Christian fundamentalist adds. Well, Joseph Smith was martyred, and I'm sure other Mormons were killed as well. Not to mention they were driven all the way across the country. Persecuted, just like the Christians. So my end point to this to the Christian fundamentalist, because I'm sure they have never thought of this, is that out of the 2 stories, the Joseph Smith story of being visited by an angel and being presented golden plates that came from God that eventually became the Book of Mormon, versus the story of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which began having transcriptions no less than probably 30 years after his death, which eventually became the Gospels, the story of Joseph Smith has more credibility. It has authorship, it has witnesses, it has confirmation of the people who are actually there, and is only a few hundred years ago. And apparently it was convincing enough to have 17 million followers today, convincing enough for people to be driven across the country in persecution, sometimes killed, versus giving up their faith, because there were eyewitness accounts that were documented, versus your account of the Gospels that has no direct eyewitness accounts or authorship. So, Christian evangelical, why don't you consider Joseph Smith's tale, but wholly believe in your own? Because that's the magic that you were brought up with. And if you're a Christian fundamentalist, I dare say brainwashed with. And someone who is brought up in the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, they are just as equally convinced of their magic as you are in yours, because it is the same brainwashing. When you're told something as a very young child, and it is repetitively and daily indoctrinated into you through your childhood, your teen years, your late teen years, and your after teen years, you will be wholly convinced that your beliefs are true. And the reason you won't consider Joseph Smith's story as legitimate, even though there's far more direct eyewitness account, that is confirmed, that is documented, that has statements from the people who were there, is because you weren't brainwashed with these stories when you were young. But you are brainwashed with your own story, such as the creation myth, Adam and Eve, the Great Flood, and Noah's Ark. You will look at the Book of Mormon like it is ludicrous, but believe in your own faith as legitimate. You believe your magic is true. So the fundamentalists will now ask me, am I saying I believe in Joseph Smith's tale? No, not at all. I think Joseph Smith was a con man. I think the witnesses were liars, and I think the whole tale was completely made up. And I believe it was made up even though there are issued statements from the people who were there. I'm certainly not going to believe in a resurrection of Jesus Christ when there were no confirmation statements from witnesses at all. But my point is, Christian fundamentalist, is you should really step back for a second and reflect where your beliefs actually come from. Because I just showed you a much more credible story, a much more believable story coming from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that you will not even remotely consider, even though we have confirmation of the eyewitness accounts. But you wholeheartedly believe in the legitimacy of Christ's resurrection in the Gospels and all his miracles when you don't have one single witness at all. And then you have to ask yourself, as many deconverts have in the past, were the tenets of my proposed religion really believable to begin with? Now, if you'd like to see some other reasons I don't think Christ's resurrection was legitimate, tap that end card at the end of the video, and I will see you next time as we once again take that sword of reason and reality and thrust it right through the heart of ignorance.